Okay, looks like we have a good number of people. So I'm going to kick off. I will keep my introduction short and hand over to our amazing room full of speakers here. But I just wanted to welcome you to this event hosted by Human Rights Watch. I'm Anna Bacciarelli. I'm a senior researcher on artificial intelligence in Human Rights Watch's tech team. I'm moderating today's event and I will be introducing timekeeping, making sure we get a good discussion going around the human rights at stake when it comes to the gig economy and the growth of digital labour platforms, and importantly, what we can do about this. And briefly, before we introduce our speakers in front of us, I want to give a shout out to Lena Simmet and Amos Toe, the lead authors of a new report published by Human Rights Watch yesterday on exactly this issue. So the gig trap, algorithmic wage and labour exploitation in platform work in the US, lays out how a combination of structural barriers and sort of policies evading employment practices, along with technological practices and design choices by gig companies, leave workers without their hard-won rights. And yeah, we're going to discuss this from a number of perspectives today. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Lena.
Thanks, Anna. I think maybe let's hear from Enrique first, if that's okay.
Oh, thank you very much, everyone. Good day, everyone. I deeply appreciate Human Rights Watch for the opportunity to share with you the importance of the gig trap report from the perspective of those who live this reality every day. Behind every delivery, every share ride, and every package that arrives on time, there is a real person whose life is being shaped by algorithms. People like Alejandro, who after falling behind on rent, had to sell his computer to survive while driving for Uber, or like Julia, who has robbed while working and received no support after the trauma, or like Christian in Mexico, who lost a leg while delivering food for Uber Eats and received no compensation from the company, leaving him unable to work. What do the recent reports reveal that is so crucial for platform workers? Well, first of all, they put numbers to the harsh reality. A median of $3 to $4 per hour after expenses, which is at least 35% below the federal minimum wage in Mexico. This violates the minimum standards established in labor laws to guarantee a dignified life. As documented too by the ILO, all the platforms offer income opportunities with few barriers to entry. 3/4 of platform workers struggle to cover basic needs while companies generate billions in profits. Second, they expose the invisible algorithm control that defines workers' lives. The ILO has clearly documented how algorithms not only determine task assignment, but also monitor, evaluate, penalize, and creating a sophisticated surveillance system when an algorithm decides how much workers are worth, which jobs they deserve, and whether they can continue working tomorrow without explanation of real possibility of appeal that isn't genuine independent work. Third, they suggest that this model isn't inevitable. Reports propose concrete solutions such as a proper worker classification, algorithm protection, living wages, access to social protection, and the right to organize, and of course, freedom of association and collective bargaining. These changes are not only possible, but necessary and urgent in the face of the dynamics of labor injustice that perpetuate precarious works. What's at stake? It's the future of work of millions. And according to the ILO report, platform work is growing exponentially globally, from 193 platforms in 2010 to over 1,000 in 2023. This accelerated growth has irreversibly transformed the world of work. Purely national responses are no longer sufficient to address the global impact of platforms, as the problems faced by platform workers in one country are, in many cases, the same as those faced in other, regardless of geographical borders. This phenomenon poses structural challenges that require global solutions to ensure that all platform workers receive the same protections and benefits regardless of the country in which they work. Platform workers aren't asking for charity. They are asking for dignity and respect for their fundamental human and labor rights. They are asking for technology to serve people, not the other way around. And here lies the crucial importance of the standard setting process that the ILO has initiated in 2025. The world urgently needs an international convention on decent work in the platform economy. This convention must be a global framework that establishes a minimum floor of protections for all workers, regardless of the country they live in on the platform they work for. It is essential that global regulation ensure that all platforms comply with minimum standards that allow for decent work for all, regardless of the worker of technology use. Without binding international standards, platform will continue to exploit regulatory gaps between jurisdictions, perpetuating as a system where fundamental labor rights depend on postal codes. We think that an ILO convention will be the first solution to establish common principles that guarantee fair remuneration, algorithmic transparency, the activation with due process, and social protections for all platform workers. The implementation of these global standards will help balance the power between technology companies and workers. This report should be seen as a call for urgent global action. The future of work being built today will determine the kind of society we will have tomorrow. That future requires clear rules that put people above algorithms, justice above exploitation, and human rights above profit maximization. Thank you for this big opportunity to share these thoughts that we have as a worker union. Thank you very much for everyone.
Thank you so much, Enrique. Now, Lena and Amos, please take the floor.
Thanks so much, Anna. And it's really great to be here with all of you since you've been involved in this research and the report that we are launching today to some degree. Thank you also so much, Enrique, for sharing your perspectives, since it was really important for us throughout the research to highlight and also have the report be shaped by the voices of the workers and be guided by the changes that they seek and also to represent the difficulties that they face in their working conditions. So just to maybe share a couple of things that we highlighted in this research that has been years in the making, and hence it's very exciting to be launching it today, is that we studied 7 platform companies throughout this research, some of which I'm sure almost all of you have heard of. That includes Amazon, Flipkart, Lyft, and Uber, which have really boomed in the last decade and a half. Platform companies now employ a growing share of workers, with estimates suggesting that nearly 16% of adults in the United States have worked for a platform at least once. And as engagement and demand has gone up with platforms, so have also revenues and profits. Uber, for instance, which is the leading provider of rideshare services in the US, recorded a net income of $9.8 billion for 2024 and described its fourth quarter as its strongest ever. Which, the largest food delivery provider in the country, recorded a 24% year-over-year revenue growth. So while the companies seem to be doing well and profits have risen, the situation of earnings and the working conditions have not. So in a survey that we conducted for this research in Texas with platform workers there, we found that workers earned just $5.12 an hour on average. That's including tips and after deducting work-related expenses and factoring in benefits. That is 30% below the federal minimum wage, which is already very low in the US, and 70% below what MIT considers to be a living wage in the state. Pay can also heavily fluctuate depending on order demand and a myriad of other factors that are often unknown to workers. On top of low wages, as we've already heard from Enrique, workers lack access to several forms of social protection, including unemployment insurance, paid sick leave, and compensation for work-related injuries. We spoke with workers who were carjacked while delivering orders, threatened at gunpoint, or have been physically injured on the job. And the lack of social protection meant that many left, or most were left without income while they recovered. At the heart of all this is worker misclassification. As platform companies continue to misclassify workers as independent contractors, which enables them to bypass labor protections and tax obligations. Meanwhile, companies have created a business model that shifts the cost and risk of doing business onto workers. And the consequences for workers are real. 3/4 of workers that we surveyed said they struggled to pay for housing in the last year. Most said they have difficulty paying for food, electricity, and water. And a third said they couldn't cover a $400 emergency that workers experience, from legal hurdles to high turnover rates, isolation, and fear of retaliation. And finally, there's also a public cost to this business model. Between 2020 and 2022, we estimate that Texas lost over $111 million in unemployment insurance contributions due to the misclassification of platform workers in rideshare, food delivery, and in-home services alone. Ultimately, this model traps people in poverty and deepens already high levels of inequality, and is in violation with a series of international human rights standards that we laid out in this report. We find that technology is used as a veneer, one that obscures exploitation behind a facade of innovation. And on that note, I'm really glad to have my former HLW colleague, Amos Toe, here with us, who will talk more about the role of algorithmic management in platform work and what we found. Over to you.
Thanks, Lena. I just also first want to say that you know, many workers have really helped us advance this report, and this would not have been possible without their bravery, their expertise, and their stories. So I just first want to center them, as well as the people that have stood in solidarity with these workers. I want to also situate the report and its findings in the current moment that we are in. It is a particularly perilous moment for US democracy, where tech billionaires have launched a hostile takeover of government, most notably through the Department of Government Efficiency, which is slashing the federal workforce, canceling contracts, grants, and regulations, and installing an AI-first vision of governance. And all of this really begs the question, what kind of efficiency does the unfettered automation of work create? And more importantly, who is this efficient for? Is it truly democratizing, as Elon Musk and the Trump administration have promised? Or does it further concentrate power in the hands of the ultra-wealthy tech elite at the expense of the rights of the many? While the moment the United States is in today may seem unprecedented, the tech industry has actually been answering these questions for years and turning the most precarious sectors of the economy into playgrounds for AI experimentation. Arguably, ground zero of this experimentation has been the app-based economy. Our report documents the games and gambles that workers are made to play with their wages, where the house wins more often than not. Algorithmic gamblification, as Professor Veena Dubal has called it, is ever-changing. Some of the methods detailed in our report have probably evolved. In a couple of months, they may even be unrecognizable. But constant upheaval is the point. It is meant to keep workers on the back foot and obscure the true costs that workers bear for the miles they rack up without passengers or deliveries or on unproductive routes, the physical and mental toll of injuries and accidents, and the financial penalties of being deactivated without due process. But the data that we have collected is clear. App-based platforms are presiding over a large-scale erosion of wage and living standards for essential workers, even as they reap record profits and tighten their stranglehold on the transportation and delivery sectors. The consequences of this imbalance in power are devastating. I remember that when we went to Texas, there were many workers we spoke to that just simply broke down in tears because they felt overwhelmed by the conditions that they were forced to endure and the constant upheaval of the wages and the amount of money they would get on a day-to-day basis. We, for example, spoke to a driver who was working 12-hour days, but still unable to afford health insurance to cover medication and treatment for his diabetes. So returning to the question of who this is efficient for, the tech industry is optimizing the development and rollout of AI, not just to strengthen their market position and profit margins. This is also an AI-driven displacement of regulatory capacity and expertise. Since they hold the keys to understanding how their AI systems have introduced errors and abuses, they are also positioning themselves as the only actors with the insight and resources to fix them. In degrading regulatory standards and covering their tracks, they are also acting as de facto regulators. This illuminates, I think, the path forward, which our report has laid out in broad strokes. It is important to return to tried and true regulatory standards that have worked for decades, and while they must be adapted to meet the technological advancements of our age, their core content must be protected. This includes the ABC test for employment and the need to strengthen the federal minimum wage standards, as well as urgent reforms to the social safety net. There are also legislative proposals that are out there. There are legislation that is out there that also serves as a model. While the EU's Platform Work Directive is not perfect, it does provide a promising path forward on how to impose guardrails on platform companies. Rajasthan's Platform-Based Gig Workers Act, which was passed in July 2023, also grants platform workers access to general and specific social security schemes and requires platforms to contribute up to 2% of their revenue to the welfare fund. Regulation that actually protects workers is possible, and we need to be able to advance that. So I'm just going to stop here and looking forward to hear other people's thoughts.
Thanks so much. And now I'm going to pass to Nicole Moore, who can speak a little to her experiences. Please introduce yourself as well.
Hi, I'm Nicole Moore. I'm here from Los Angeles, California. I'm a part-time driver, and I am the elected president of Rideshare Drivers United, which is an organization we started in California to try to fight for our own rights. I really am moved by the report and Amos and Lena, the things that you are saying. It is really hard and isolating as a driver to see this intense abuse of our trust. We're pulled into these apps. We're given something that is just good enough to make us think we can do this, and then many drivers spend years trying to get themselves out. It's just such a difficult place. I just one snapshot is that, you know, we have to buy rather new cars for the business in the United States, and so we'll have a car note. Within 2 years as a full-time driver, you may have as many as 200 or 300,000 miles on your car. You have 3 more years of car note, and your car is breaking down, and you've basically been living hand to mouth. You earn a day's living, you fill up your gas tank, and you barely have enough to put away for rent. That's what's going on. And people do not understand what's going on at the regulatory and legislative levels. The companies have come in like bulldozers, not paying attention to any of the labor laws, saturated the market, and pulled in many consumers for low prices and many drivers for higher wages, and now have flipped the script so that passengers are paying ridiculous amounts of money for trips that were maybe half that a couple of years ago. Well, as drivers, we're actually getting half what we used to get for the same rights. And so we're seeing this gap between what passengers pay and drivers earn. When I started, I was guaranteed 80% of what the passenger paid, and that's flipped. There is not, nobody is making more than 40 or 50% of what the passengers pay, and many of our rides are far less than that. We are receiving rides on our apps that would cost us more to take than it would to just sit in a driveway somewhere. We're not earning. So I just think, then we've tried to enforce the laws, and what they've done in California is something that they've wanted to do all over the world, which is they want to change the laws to carve out drivers so that we don't benefit from labor rights, basically. And they're hypnotizing the world that somehow by having an algorithm, that manages us, that we're not managed at all. We're actually building our own businesses. It's not true. I don't set my own wages. I do not even get to really decide whether to take a ride or not, because I'm incentivized with bonuses. And if I don't take the 10th ride, I'm not going to get that bonus. So I better take it, even though I'm losing money on that ride. So the reality is low pay, no safety net. You can be deactivated by the algorithm for something you don't even know what you did, and you have no unemployment insurance to rely on, or any of the things that workers in the United States generally count on when you're managed. And we are managed by robots. And while this is now, it puts it, it's drivers and delivery workers being deployed by app. It puts at risk the entire workforce, because all of us can be deployed by app. My work in healthcare, which is my day job, can be deployed by app. Does that mean I now have no labor rights? I'm an independent contractor and I have no safety net, and my wages are gonna, have no meaning. So, I think it is so great to see what this report is calling for in terms of government regulation, and to bring app workers back under the safety net of labor rights. Here in the United States, we have to raise labor rights. There's nobody in the country that thinks we have enough, in terms of federal minimum wage, in terms of anything, but drivers are actually below that. We're sitting in the dungeon, and we have to be brought under that safety net, and then we need to lift everybody together. So to read, the recommendations of this report is so wonderful. It is so hard to see this continue the way it is for drivers. And I have colleagues, who lose their homes, who lose their cars, who lose their relationships to their family because they're putting 60 or 70 hours a week just to try to make rent. It's not okay. It's inhumane and it's immoral, and we have to pull it into check. So I so want to see the power of this report moved wherever it needs to be. We have to call this into check. Thank you so much for letting me be here.
Thanks so much, Nicole. Really, really grateful to hear your experience and completely co-sign everything you say. I'm going to be brief because we're short in time, but I'm going to hand over now to Vina Dupal.
Hi, all. Thank you so much for inviting me to be here. And thank you really to Nicole and Enrique and other folks here who are part of the labor movement who have been experiencing and fighting these precarities over the last 15 years. I want to start by just reading you something that Peter Thiel said in 2010, speaking at Libertopia. Peter Thiel, you all know from Palantir and PayPal, but he's also a major investor in Lyft. He said, the basic idea was that we could never win an election on getting certain things because we were in such a small minority. But maybe you could unilaterally change the world without having to constantly convince people and beg people and plead with people who are never going to agree with you through technological means. And this is where I think technology is this incredible alternative to politics. Being in the US right now, 14 years after Peter Thiel made that statement, is an incredibly painful and scary experience, whether you're a Lyft driver or a professor of law, frankly. But I wanted to read that aloud because he made that statement right before Lyft was his investments in Lyft. And I think it really represents a lot of how the governance of these companies occurs within the firm and how the companies are themselves thinking about their relationship, not just with workers, but also with the state. So it was in 2012 when Uber and Lyft actually became operational. And they first hit the streets of San Francisco and California, where I live. And there was this really strong feeling among regulators, among legislators, that what was happening was remarkable, that we were emerging from the Great Recession and people like Nicole were able to all of a sudden not have to apply for a job, but just, turn on their apps and get in their own cars and share their days with someone else. There was this sense that a really strong sense that labor regulations didn't need to be extended to this space because venture capitalists were giving workers so much more than was profitable, right? These were not market rates, and consumers were getting rides for so cheap, diverting millions and billions of dollars from public transportation. This was all, of course, fake. Like, it was a fake world that got people, consumers, addicted to quick, cheap rides and got literally manipulated. Like, the FTC fined Uber and Lyft for the way that they were offering loans to drivers that were much higher than market rate interest rates, literally manipulating people into investing their whole lives into being workers in this sector. And at the time, among labor unions, there was some alarm, but there was really a sense that this was a self-contained project, that this wasn't going to extend beyond ride hail and, taxi workers hadn't been unionized since the late 1970s, and just a real sense that this wasn't something that people needed to be attentive to. Both the regulators who turned their eyes and saw this as remarkable, and the labor unions who averted their eyes and said, well, this isn't going to happen to us, both were woefully wrong. As the Human Rights Watch report documents, this technologically mediated piecework that was reinvented by Lyft and Uber and DoorDash and Instacart in the early 2010s in the shadows of the Great Recession has become one of the most dangerous, low-paying jobs, not just in the US, but also in the world. These jobs have spread to cities across the US. The world over, the people who do this labor are among the most marginalized and vulnerable populations. They are migrants, racial minorities, people with no caste, people with low caste. In San Francisco, where I work, they're over 80% racial minorities and immigrant workers. And the low pay and the physical and psychological dangers of the work that the report underscores are, of course, related. Workers who are only guaranteed pay for time when they are given work till when they finish that work make, as the report found, just over $5 an hour. So this was the same finding of a report that Nicole led in California after Prop 22 passed. This is the same wage finding as Gig Workers United found in Canada. This is around the wage that people are making. But what's important to note is that it's the average wage. There are some people who make nothing, who work 12 hours a day and unpredictably on unpredictable days make absolutely nothing. And I think we have to understand what is happening, not as the advent of something new, but also as the retrenchment of over a century of hard-won labor rights. So all of these things that all of these other workers have been fighting for all over the world, we just got the minimum wage and in many different jurisdictions across the world in the 90s. All of these things that people have been fighting so hard for are just gone like this, because somehow this is new and different, as Amos really articulated really beautifully, just, the veneer of technology. So in addition to understanding this as a space of retrenchment, of loss of labor standards, we also need to see it as a site of labor experimentation, as Amos also articulated. Because this has been a gray area where there's been little to no labor enforcement, these firms have used this to ensure that workers are being controlled in ways that they've never been controlled before, as it relates to wages, as it relates to surveillance, as it relates to termination and hiring. It is, as one Brazilian judge put it, Uber is a hyper employer. They are not just an employer. They are a hyper employer. And I guess I'll end just to really emphasize, as I began to say, that all of this has spread well beyond the ride hail and food delivery. It's spread into healthcare, logistics, retail, and hospitality industries. So in 2023 in California, when hotel workers went on strike, the scabs that the hotels were brought in through a company called InstaWork. The workers actually had no idea, the ones that were working for InstaWork had no idea that they were being asked to cross a picket line, underscoring the myriad ways that these companies not only offer low pay, increase surveillance and control, but also break labor solidarity and possibilities for growing labor power to regain labor and employment rights. And I'll just end by saying that while the Platform Work Directive in the EU is kind of a North Star in thinking about algorithmic management and employment status, despite sort of its limitations, California is the opposite. I don't know what the opposite of the North Star is, but it's the place you don't want to go. Proposition 22 is the most disastrous labor law of my lifetime. Workers have essentially no labor rights, and what it does is it regulates to ensure that workers have no labor rights, no minimum wage, no unemployment insurance, no real workers' compensation, and what is the most dangerous work, more dangerous than police work. So when you're thinking, as we think about solutions to this problem, I think it's really important to think not only about what can be done right, but what has been done woefully wrong.
Thanks so much, Vina. Lance, pass it over to you.
Thank you, Anna. Many of you probably know that Human Rights Watch has been a leader among human rights organizations in its attention to workers' rights, not only in other countries, such as supply chain factory workers or agricultural plantation workers, but in the United States as well, as reflected in earlier reports on meatpacking workers in the United States and on Walmart workers, among several others. This is another signature report in that tradition. And like the others, it combines a rigorous analytical framework with a wealth of concrete details. This is where the real richness of this report comes out, in the concrete details and the case studies that flesh out the analysis. I don't work directly in this area, and many of these things were revelations to me. This whole idea of gamification. I guess I had a vague idea, but this really clarified it, and that it puts these already vulnerable workers into a perverse competition with one another. To win the game. But everybody's losing, trying to win the game. And the arbitrary deactivation phenomenon. This is a word straight out of the TV show Severance. It's Orwellian, and maybe these are too many references, but it's a fancy word for getting sacked out of the blue with no explanation and no recourse in most cases. Now, I'm sure that Monica and Olivier will address the international human rights context for platform workers. I just want to follow up on Vina's comments with a few words about the US context and what American labor rights advocates can do. First of all, take this report and run with it. Just put it to use it to weave human rights arguments into every ad space available. I know it's challenging. The United States has always been inward looking on labor issues, but I think it's important to international labor and human rights standards in domestic labor campaigns. For one thing, it counterweighs the accusation that trade union special interests are behind these campaigns. It also helps to build global alliances and to learn strategic lessons from advocates around the world. The report is especially timely because workers' rights in the United States generally are under attack, and some of the attacks are aimed squarely at platform workers. The Trump administration has issued executive orders that reverse really modest steps taken in recent years, like Department of Labor regulations offering more protection for gig workers under the Fair Labor Standards Act, and decisions of the National Labor Relations Board that expand bargaining rights for misclassified under the NLRA. Like other things that this administration is doing, these moves are arguably unlawful, but they're tied up in weeks and months and maybe even years of litigation. We might have more opportunities at the state and local level to make progress on these issues. There are important initiatives in California. People in California have not given up. The luta continua, as we say, the struggle continues. And I'm sure workers and advocates in California will find many ways to, keep this fight going. And also in Washington State, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Delaware, Minneapolis, and many more. Advocates should lay this report on the table in all those settings and even cite it in legal briefs where appropriate. One final word, the report's focus on social protection is just as important as bargaining rights. Again, economic and social rights are a hard sell in the States, but that's not a reason not to make the case, especially as this report shows when the social costs of platform workers' exclusion from Social Security, workers' compensation, health insurance, paid sick leave, and so on, and other benefits violate their human rights and ultimately get pushed onto taxpayers generally rather than the companies that are profiting from their labor. So bottom line, let's learn from this report and find creative ways to use it going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Lance. I'm handing over now to Monica.
Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much, Human Rights Watch, for launching this report. Very timely. And also thank you so much for all the colleagues. It's been amazing to learn from you and to share these experiences and also the reality, the human reality that you have been describing. And yes, we are ahead of a very important global conference in June, in a few 2 weeks, actually, that after a nearly decade-long advocacy campaign, we will begin the historic deliberation at the international level conference on a possible future standards that regulate the decent work in the platform economy. So we have a clear objective, and I think that all of us here in the room, we share the same purpose. We must request the governments. We need to have a convention that is supplemented by a recommendation that provides rights and protection for all the platform workers. As part of the ILO process, maybe some of you are not fully aware, but the ILO prepared a report that was launched in January. It is also called the Yellow Report, but that report shows, and we are very happy to see that, an overwhelming majority of governments and workers' organizations calling for a convention. The almost unprecedented number of responses to this questionnaire in this process shows something that is critical. There is an urgent need to regulate the platform economy, and that the ILO is the best place to take the lead with a standard setting to protect workers in the field. The rationale for regulating the platform economy, well, it is grounded in the growing body of evidence. And here we have seen only one report plus all the experience for the colleagues, but there are so many reports already that show and demonstrate how digital level platforms, both online and on location, are systematically undermining labor rights. Today's millions of workers are treated as a mere commodities, because the business model leaves them outside all labor protection at the mercy of the markets. Nicole was mentioning that. They are exploited, they are misclassified, as if they were the master of their own destiny. But this platform model depends heavily on a non-standard form of employment, and in many cases, this gives employment relationship. This type of employment status misclassification exposes workers to all the financial and social risk. When I was saying, they may spend days without getting anything, working without getting anything. They are deprived of minimum wages, no holidays, no leave, and no social protection. We are seeing a proliferation of jobs with no labor protection and rights, with poverty pay, with excessive working hours. And this is the reality of millions of workers today, and will have, and is still, and is having a disastrous effect in our societies. We know already that international ILO fundamental principles and rights at work, and specifically I'm mentioning freedom of association, collective bargaining, apply to all workers. But this is not the reality of millions of workers. And this is because of the mechanism created by the non-regulated business model. Workers report, it is in the report, Anna, unpaid wages, arbitrarily and unilaterally determined pay rates, and the absence of consultation and bargaining. The everyday experience of platform workers is defined by algorithmic management practices. This business model driven by ratings, reward, and I'm very happy to hear you were mentioning gamification, right? What does it mean? It's human beings getting stars, human beings getting diamonds, which influence those diamonds and stars and this game. And I'm very happy to hear that nobody is winning. Well, actually, yes, a few business companies winning, but the rest of the world is not winning. Influence how workers access to employment opportunities. They also reflect discriminatory bias and allow abuses. Addition to this is the uses of data collection. Often workers are not even informed about that. So this is why this is a unique opportunity for the governments. They need to understand clearly, but also for the good companies. We have a unique opportunity to address these urgent needs by establishing an international convention. That convention will help to create a level playing field for countries and for business. Such instrument will bring legal clarity, facilitate harmonization across borders, and definitely will prevent a race to the bottom in labor standards. But of course, in the absence of harmonized regulation across countries, and yeah, it's true, we need to also learn about the bad examples, many governments are also foregoing significant opportunities to generate tax revenues, to enforce the right, to ensure that the business operates legally, fairly, and in full respect of fundamental rights within their own jurisdiction. So this is why the workers and the trade union movement, we are calling for a convention. That convention should cover all digital platforms, meaning the location platform and online platform. Should ensure that fundamental rights are a reality for all. They should also put an obligation, the convention should put an obligation on the state to combat employment status misclassification and to ensure the correct classification on platform workers based on the primacy of the fact principle. We need fair remuneration for platform workers, covering all the time labored, including waiting times, and of course, definitely, cost recovery for expenses and other costs borne by the workers. We need also extension for social protection for all platform workers, and we need clearly regulation of algorithmic management, including information and consultation rights on the introduction, use, and modification of algorithmic, and a right to a human review of the decision made by the algorithmic. Of course, we also are pushing for protection against algorithmically determined deactivation, protection and governance of workers' personal data, prevention of migrants and refugees to be abused and exploited in the digital economy, and of course, effective labor inspections, grievance, and dispute mechanism. It's the moment. This is time to deliver rights for all platform workers. This is the time to stop corporate abuses, and it's time for workers to take back the dignity. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I really could listen to all of you speak all day, but I really want to hand over now to Olivier de Schutter, who's UN Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty and Human Rights, for his remarks.
Thank you very much, Anna. I will be concise. Much has been said. I would like to thank, of course, Lina and Amos for making clear what is important in this report, which I really applaud. It's extremely convincing, well researched, and absolutely timely with the upcoming June International Labour Conference that, as Monica just mentioned, will be addressing the need for a new international instrument to better protect platform workers. And as Monica also said, there have been reports in the past presented within the ILO context that describe the large number of violations of labor rights that result from the introduction of these technologies and these new ways of putting people to work. There was in March 2023 a presentation to the governing body of the ILO of a report titled A Normative Gap Analysis on Decent Work in the Platform Economy, and more recently in January 2024, the White Report, the Law and Practice Report, Realizing Decent Work in the Platform Economy. And what all these reports show is massive violations of a range of rights, freedom of association and collective bargaining, forced labor, even child labor in some cases, labor inspectorates that are unable to do their work, of course, poverty wages, lack of regulation of working time, health and safety concerns, and of course, lack of social security. And this is just one short list of the major concerns that these reports expressed. Now, a couple of years ago, I prepared a report on the working poor that I presented to the United Nations General Assembly. And part of that report was dedicated to the issue of platform workers. And I expressed a number of concerns that also led me to write to a number of companies that I could explore in greater depth. One of them is DoorDash, which represents some 2/3 of the food delivery market in the US, with revenues that increased by 24% over the past year to reach a total $10 billion in annual output. So it's a very major enterprise. And I wrote to them in May 2023, describing or expressing a number of concerns as regards how they operate. And DoorDash responded by describing their business model, saying that they were working to find solutions, and essentially arguing that people who are employed through this app have chosen the model and prefer to be independent contractors. Now, let me make perhaps 3 remarks. First, reference was made to a 2024 directive adopted within the EU on improving working conditions in platform work. The directive is Directive 2024/2831. And yes, it is true that this directive is a major step forward for the EU, of course, to which it applies. It makes 3 major contributions. The first one is that it reduces the risk of workers being misclassified as independent contractors by establishing a legal presumption of employee status, where there are facts indicating direction and control. Then the presumption is that the worker is an employee, and it will be for the company to rebut that presumption by showing that, in fact, this person is truly an independent contractor. So this is important because in Europe, as elsewhere, the case law is very imprecise and unpredictable. And unfortunately, we had judgments going in many different directions. So that's the first major contribution of the directive. The second one, is Monica described, is the transparency of algorithms and the requirement of a human oversight of automated monitoring systems. Workers who are judged by algorithms and potentially even removed from the app as a result of the algorithmic calculation, they have a right to obtain an oral or a written explanation from the digital labor platform, and they have a right to this being reviewed. And finally, the directive promotes the right to collective bargaining in platform work. However, I should say that this directive does not answer another question, which is not one related to location-based apps such as TaskRabbit, Uber, Deliveroo, or DoorDash, but which is the use of platform work to establish a global competition between workers all over the world in areas such as editing, accounting, translation, and so forth, in which we have platforms that basically recruit workers in, just in time to have tasks performed in low-wage jurisdictions that make workers in the more affluent countries completely redundant. There is a downward pressure on wages in the country to which services can be provided by these apps globally. The average hourly wage of workers on web-based platforms in the world is $3.4 per hour, and half of the workers employed on these platforms work for less than $2.1 dollars per hour. And so that is a challenge that platforms that recruit workers all over the world in order to perform certain tasks are confronting us with, and that will be a significant challenge in the future. And I hope that the ILO convention under preparation will address that issue also. And finally, let me say that the report presented yesterday by Human Rights Watch calls for passing the Protected Right to Organize Act, which would guarantee workers who are independent who are independent contractors only by name, who are actually employees, the right to organize and to form unions and to negotiate collectively. And of course, that is extremely important, and I very much hope that this PRO Act will be passed as soon as possible. However, in some jurisdictions, and particularly in Europe, it is important to note that the right to organize, to form unions, and to enter into collective bargaining is not limited to employees. Independent contractors can also organize. And the key question is, are they pressured by an employer who basically dictates the conditions under which these independent contractors work, even if they work at an arm's length from the employer in question? And so I don't believe we should limit the right to form unions and the right to collective bargaining only to those who work under the supervision and control of an employer, and thus are employees. We should also extend this right to form unions and to collective bargaining to independent contractors. And I will close by saying that the most important statements we heard, I think, in this exchange came from the very moving testimonies we heard from Jose Enrique Oñate and Nicole Moore. And I will remember the phrase that Nicole wrote in the chat box: "We are extensions of the app." I hope not, but I'm sure she's right. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone. We've gone through a lot, and unfortunately, we have run out a little time, but we're going to stay on for an extra 10 minutes for those who can, to answer some of the questions. Please continue posting them in the chat, and our panelists will answer them. I've drawn out a couple here, and I'm going to address them to Enrique and Nicole in particular. There's a couple of questions that ask, can you talk a little more about your approach to organising and mobilising drivers or independent contractors and building new unions or representative workers orgs? And then another question along similar lines that says, it seems like drivers are going to have to drag politicians into this fight. What is the most effective strategy in organising workers to build the power? Enrique, Nicole, are you open to answering this? Thank you.
I think the established labor movement at first decided that drivers were unorganizable. And that's hilarious to me because we're from all walks of life. We're from like construction workers to people that have been thrown out of the economy to teachers to we're all these people, and we're ready to organize. We need the resources to organize. We built our own resources with the help of a lot of allies, people in this room, and that's what you do, right? What I want to say is, because of the misclassification issue, it's not clear, how we're covered by the right to organize, but that doesn't stop people from organizing. We've been doing collective action for 8 years or even longer than that. Like, we started 8 years ago, but as an organization, but drivers, got together way before that. Like, the minute we figured out that innovation really meant exploitation, people were on the street, right? So what I want to say is you really have to look. There are some incredibly good examples of organizing. And I don't know enough about what's going on in Mexico. Enrique, I'm sure you can say more, but because of a strong government support for workers' rights and strong organizing, stuff got changed. In a more micro look at it. You can look at New York City. New York City taxi workers have been organized for 20 years, and they had an all-night fight meeting where Lyft and Uber drivers were in the room with taxi drivers and said, you know what, we got to fight this together. And so they're fighting together in the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. They have good regulation, more or less, of the transportation industry in New York, and drivers are organized as hell, and there's no National Labor Relations Act that's protecting folks, but they have actually set standards because the city demands the data. If companies don't provide the data, they're not allowed to operate. And then they have data-based rate cards. How much are you getting per mile and per minute? Just like when you get in a taxi, you get a per mile per minute rate, right? It's like that, but it's based on data to make sure that that money also is enough to cover the fact that a lot of your time is you don't have a passenger in the back. That's work time. You should get paid for it. A lot of your money goes into your car. You need to get reimbursed for that. So those rates have to be high enough to cover those things. They've established that. And then they've fought in the courts to make sure that drivers are covered by unemployment insurance, other things that, and there's still this question of, are we employees or not employees? But people are fighting in the courts. They're fighting on the streets. Regulators are helping. That's the North Star in the United States. We can do that anywhere. Do we need national laws? Yes, because we shouldn't be playing whack-a-mole in every community where drivers are getting the crap beat out of us, right? So we have to organize, and people are, what I want to say is this is not an advocacy situation. Advocacy in this room is strong and powerful because it's giving voice to drivers. But there's a way that if you just advocate and you don't develop the leadership that exists in these cars, we're not going to shift the power. And to Amos's point, what's going on in the United States is we have to build leadership in every industry. And
Thanks.
that's how we're going to change the situation. All of us are ready to organize. Most of us don't have time to organize because we're on, if you're doing this work full time, I thankfully have a day job, so I'm not doing it full time. But if you are doing this work full time, it is really hard to organize because you are on the street 70 hours. But you know what? With a little bit of resource, we can make a lot happen. And that's what we've done in California. We have one staff person.
Thanks, Nicole. Can I pass now to Enrique? Sorry, I'm just really aware of time. I don't want to cut you off, and I really appreciate your contribution.
I could go on.
Enrique, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the two questions are very important because a platform worker organizing requires innovative approaches to address the unique challenge that the gig economy. Successful models blend digital-first organizing strategies like using measuring apps, social media, coordinated spaces between the workers. So with a strategic in-person outreach and natural gathering points, while overcoming classification barriers through worker centers of sector organizing that transcends individual platforms. Another good point is the financial sustainability. I think this typically combines flexible membership models with the revenue diversification. The sustainable worker powering the platform economy emerges when the structures are specifically designed to match the decentralized nature of platform work, with multi-level advocacy that simultaneously address work needs, policy reform, and platform accountability. So it's a big challenge, but I think, and with that, I close my statement that we have a little short time, that the platform workers need to humanize and dignity for workers of the platform worlds with an international prime level, but of course with national level too, with laws. In Mexico, we have been working through the national law to have this new law in the platform economy. So that allow us and help us to have more specific steps to go for the fundamental principles to rise to work. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I think we're going to wrap up there since we see people dropping off and we're over time, although we could keep talking about this all day, frankly. So I just want to thank all of the speakers today and everyone that asked questions. This is clearly such a live issue that is, increasingly impacting rights, but also there are increasing avenues for advocacy in a positive way. So thank you all. We will upload this to our YouTube channel, and thanks again.